Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today.
This is Keshler.
And this is Right Now, and you're listening to My Reason Why, where we explore people's journeys that led them to where they are today.
Every believer has a reason for the faith that they hold, and we would like to explore their reason why.
My name is Melissa. I am from Brooklyn, New York, the one and only. I am also a criminal justice professor, and I'm an assistant professor in the field of criminal justice, and my work mainly focuses on incarceration and family dynamics and how having a parent incarcerated can impact someone's lifehood. So from their childhood to their adolescence and also their adulthood stage as well. So that's most of the work that I do. I also focus on race in the criminal justice system and how that impacts certain outcomes and punishments for individuals. So yeah, happy to be here.
And what kind of got you into that? And did you pop out being like, yeah, I want to I want to learn more about like the criminal justice system? Like, how'd you kind of get into that?
It's quite interesting, my journey into this field. So just growing up in Brooklyn, New York, I would witness and see different things. Just in particular, the neighborhood that I grew up in. So there was crime all around me. You would hear gunshots on a regular and so forth and so on. But I remember specifically when I was in high school, I had a friend that was murdered, and he was actually murdered about 2 blocks away from me. And just looking at how the outcomes of his particular case, where it wasn't necessarily solved or handled, and it was just kind of this hole left in the community and also within his family and his friends, I got interested in justice, social justice issues, and making sure that not only victims of crime, but families and communities have some place where they are compensated with justice. And so I got interested in kind of like the criminal area. Now, at the time while I was in high school, I was really interested in maths and science. So I took the route of going into forensic science and forensic chemistry. I had a wonderful forensic science teacher who took me under her wings. And I declared this is going to be my major and everything when I get to college. So I get to college, and college science is not high school science. I'll just put it that way. I think it was just a different structure in the college setting. You don't get that mentor experience. You don't get that one-on-one. Your questions might go unanswered, and you just kind of feel left on your own. And so I struggled for a bit during my first year within the major, and even being in a lab setting, I just kind of felt in my heart, this isn't for me. I love to think from theoretical standpoints, and I love to think from a social standpoint as well too. And I thought most of what I was just doing was just like real structured, day-to-day things that were just routine-like, but I didn't feel like I was making an impact or difference in what I was doing. And so I talked to a career advisor at the time, and I was thinking about how do I switch my major and not lose all the credits that I just did and still find something that I enjoy and I want to do. And so they recommended for me to take a criminal justice class because it sounded like it connected what I was doing with forensic chemistry. And so I took my first criminal justice class, and I loved it. I fell in love with the class. And so I sort of wanted to be a criminal investigator. So since high school, my whole theme or my whole entire goal was to make sure that I solve crimes within the community. And so I wanted to be a criminal investigator. Well, my junior year is when I found out that in order for me to be a criminal investigator, I needed to be a cop for at least 4 years or a couple of years or so. And I was in New York at the time, and I could not see myself being a cop in New York City under NYPD. Absolutely not. So at that time, was like, what do I want to do? And I was a first college generation student. So just going to college was just it for me. I just wanted to graduate, be the first in my family to go to college, and that was it. I knew nothing of grad school or anything like that. But at the time, someone recommended a program to me about grad school, and it was specifically geared towards first college generation students. And I did that program my junior year. And also, actually, I did that program my senior year because I found out about it my junior year. And I did that program doing research with a professor, and I did a specific study on campus to see how college students responded to, or what were their attitudes and perceptions towards the university police on campus. And so when I did that research study, and there were so many students interested in filling out my survey, and there were people who were excited about the study, I saw that I was making a difference. It was on a different scale than actually being on a crime scene or working with a particular crime, but I was making a difference in the campus community. And so that kind of led into my trajectory of going into grad school, and then now becoming a professor and a researcher in the field. So yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's so dope. That is so dope. And it's funny because like hearing that, I'm almost jealous because I mean, not really jealous, but um before when I was looking to go to college, my plan was to go to Albany to study criminal justice because um I had kind of looked into like becoming a detective and stuff like that because I was I wanted to kind of do the same thing. I was like, I want to help people in this way. Plus, like I didn't want to be behind a desk, like I'm doing now. But anyways, but yeah. So like, would you say that like making a difference and helping people is important to you?
Yes, it absolutely does. I don't like to use the term "I'm giving voice to the voiceless" because it seems as though they're powerless and that they don't have any voice for themselves. But I do think my privilege of being in the setting that I am, I try to amplify or try to reframe the narratives about certain communities, marginalized communities, and specifically. So when I'm able to do the work that I do qualitative research. So most of my work is centered on interviews with people, especially vulnerable populations. And when I'm able to write from their lens and amplify their voices and change the narratives of what they think about certain individuals, it does make me feel like I'm making a difference in the community.
That's cool. I
Mhm.
guess like the question here is like, where would you say that, I guess, drive or those that desire that kind of led you into that path, like kind of comes from, or have you really thought about where that may have come from?
That's a great question. So I don't know where it necessarily comes from, but I can see from a young age, I've always been compassionate and making sure that everyone receives fair treatment. I don't know if it's being an older sibling, where sometimes you see your younger sibling. Shout outs to my sister, by the way. But there would be times where I would do something and receive a penalty for it. And then my sister, who's younger, would do something and receive a whole completely different outcome. And so I think from that young age of like, I want this to be fair. I want there to be justice. And then also being compassionate towards other people just kind of put me in this role. I don't like to see when there are practices that hinder people or don't serve them well. I want to make sure that everyone has an equal chance and equal opportunity to succeed in this life.
So if you don't mind me asking, I'm gonna just dive straight into the deep end. Um, and so I guess it's kind of like a two-part question, right? So like, what is your definition of justice, and how does that relate to like how you believe like God defines justice?
That is a deep question. Wow. So my idea of justice, I think it is aligned in a sense of God's idea of justice. And I think when I view God's justice, it's basically making sure that everyone, in a sense, receives the same opportunity, receive the same level of love and kindness, have the opportunity to operate in their full capacity of whatever has been implanted within them. And so I think sometimes, especially when it comes to marginalized communities, what we see is that in poverty, or we see also certain policies or the lack of resources, or we see other things that happens within communities that hinders people from operating in the full capacity of what has been given to them on the inside. And so what justice for me looks like is that you level the ground, that you provide an opportunity for people to receive I'm trying to put it into words, but to receive what they're meant to have in this lifetime. And sometimes that could be because of the results of sin that happens in this world. We might see that things happen to people that are not meant to happen, or we see because of sin that people are treated unfairly, or that people have to experience things that they probably would have never happened if sin never entered into this world. And what I see with God's justice is not only removing some of the things that people have experienced, but creating a new level ground where the person is still able to operate in their capacity and their full capabilities, and also creating a level ground where they're able to overcome some of the barriers that they have faced, making sure that justice is served in the sense of those who have done wrong receive the consequences of their actions, and that there's a new level ground that is given where a person can walk within this life freely and in the way that God meant for it to be.
So I mean, like, because like, especially like me growing up, right? Like, growing up, especially like I grew up, I guess predominantly Haitian American Seventh-day Adventist, right? So from that worldview, I've always kind of like grown up to see justice as like, oh, kind of the karma, right? Like you get what you get, or you do good, you get good, you get bad, you do bad, you get bad, right? But then like I don't know, it's weird, and maybe other people have kind of, if you guys kind of had the same question or thoughts or whatever the case may be, but growing up, then as you mentioned, Melissa, that like I see more of like more suffering and more pain and more like good people suffering or bad people winning kind of thing, right? So then I'm just like, what is this thing, right? And I think that that is a big part, right? Like knowing that there's a difference between what God intended versus what sin caused. And I think that's kind of like a hard thing for me to it was a hard thing for me to grasp. Like, wow, like so at any point I could, like, and I've seen this, right? People will like, especially I had a patient who came in like, you know, worked out every day. She was a nurse. She, was even vegan, and then like, boom, cancer. And I'm just like, dang, like, so I don't know. It's kind of like a hard thing for me to grasp. So it's just like I can't imagine what that feels like. I mean, have you experienced that, like, especially like in the criminal justice world and your like studies and like what you've experienced and stuff like that?
I think I've experienced that in life overall, right? So
Mhm.
again, going back to this definition of justice, if justice was just good people receive good things and bad people receive bad things, then we could never look up to a God and say that you are justice, because all of us in some capacity in this life experience bad things. And I think that's part of why I struggled in a sense to understand God as Father, or understand God as being present in my life or close to me, because how could you be a God of justice if bad things are happening to good people? And so I think even for myself, just some of the circumstances or some of the trials that I've experienced in life has really shaped my understanding of like what justice means, or before I even got to that level, it really challenged my perspective of what justice is from the God above. And so that's why I go back to God's justice is different from how we sometimes often view it. It's not just, bad people receive bad things, but it's God restructuring and recreating a new level ground that we could never imagine, that out of bad things that happen to good people, he creates something new. And he provides a wonderful outcome, and that where a person is still able to operate in their full capacity despite the bad thing that happened to them. And that's God's justice in it. There's still something that's able to glorify him. And so it took a lot for me to get to that point, but I had to restructure my mind frame in terms of what is justice and how God is justice as well.
Mhm.
I guess like, is there any like major event or major, I guess, scenario that you can kind of think of or remember that may have played a role in that shaping of like what justice is and how it is in relation to God?
I feel like there's so many situations and circumstances, but one thing that comes to mind before I share my personal experience, as I was reading the Bible, and I remember, also being interested in this criminal justice area, there was one story in particular that stuck out to me the most, and it's the story of Joseph. And for me, I think that's the first time you ever seen kind of like a criminal justice situation, right? Where Joseph is falsely accused of a crime that he did not commit, right? This is the first wrongful conviction. This is the first like type of real incarceration that we see. And Joseph is in the Bible, and he is held in prison for years because of something he did not do. And I relate a lot to Joseph's story in terms of some of the experiences that I faced. And in particular, I remember in 2020, when I graduated from grad school, completed my PhD, and I remember this was time for me to move to a new state, a new location. At the time, I had no idea that something had been placed on my record that I did not do, or I was not involved with, or had nothing to do with me at all. In fact, it was a mistake from a lawyer. And it's so interesting how sometimes these systems work, where all you need is the name of a person, a possible address of a place that they lived before, and you can turn in something, some type of paperwork to the court system, and you have something there. And so with this particular situation, I did not know that it was on my record until it was time to move. And it's during COVID, all of the courts are closed because of COVID. So I don't have a fighting chance of getting this removed and off of my record. I'm speaking with the lawyer who put it in, didn't even know who I was, didn't even remember how it got on my record and why he did that or how it happened, because it had been on there for some time. And I only found out about it until it's time for me to move. And in that moment, it was difficult for me to find apartment, to find a home, to move, and to relocate. And I remember just feeling so discouraged because, one, I can't even go to the court and fight this off because all of the courts are closed. But two, it's something I didn't even do. It's something that I had no involvement with, or it wasn't something regarding me or anything like that. It was just honestly a mistake from the lawyer in putting this in. And so I remember in that time crying out to God and saying, God, why are you allowing this to happen to me? I did not do this, and I don't even have the chance to fight this and to get this off. And you see how it's hindering me from even locating or relocating to the area that you're calling me to. And so I struggled with this for God for a bit, but the testimony behind this is so long, could probably take me another couple of minutes to explain all of it. But when God brought me to the place that he wanted me to be, I couldn't find an apartment, but there was one specific landlord where I said, I have all the paperwork to prove this is not me and it has nothing to do with me. I did not do this, no involvement or whatever, and I have proof. And there was one landlord who was willing to take that paperwork, review it for themselves, and see that I was innocent in the situation. And so that landlord did it, and I moved to that apartment. It was an ideal location for me, or an ideal apartment that I wanted, but at least it was somewhere where I could live and someone who was willing to take me in. But in that situation of being there for the time frame that I was in, God used me in a way to pray for, I had an upstairs neighbor at the time, and he placed it on my heart to pray for that neighbor, not knowing that he was calling me to pray for that neighbor for the last 9 months of his life. And when my upstairs neighbor passed away, unfortunately, it was like the Spirit of the Lord saying, this is why I allowed that to happen to you, so that you could pray for someone else the last remaining months of their life, and that my glory could be shined through you. I was using you for a greater calling. And so relating this back to Joseph's story, where Joseph was placed in his prison and it was unfair, it was not meant for him to happen, but God still used it for his glory. The wisdom that Joseph was able to receive while he was held behind prison, the way he was able to minister to those two people while he was in prison, and to use his gifts for God while he was in prison. And then also have this as a testimony to be written in the Bible so that it can serve and it can also bless other people who will go through similar situations. And so for me, that was one situation where I would say, like, wow, God's justice is really justice, because even though I went through an unfortunate situation, how he was able to change it and allow it to glorify his name and not allow the enemy to win in the situation.
Amazing, amazing. That's wow. That's crazy. I'm sorry. It's funny because God allows certain things to happen to certain people. Because if it was me, anyways, anyway, been up at that lawyer's house. Hey, what's up? What's going on? Just got a curiosity. Just want to talk. Just want to talk. Why am I coughing? I don't know. But just want to talk. But wow, that's crazy. And I think it's crazy because, like, at times, right, not every time, it brings me peace knowing that, like, okay, like, and trust in God. I know that he's there through the good times and the bad. It's like things we say over and over again, right? And it's just like, bringing me peace kind of knowing that, like, okay, like, God's still with me even through the storm and all these things. And like, but like, I feel like going, like, when you're in the storm, like when you're in and when it's actually happening to you, it's sometimes is a little, I don't know about you guys, but sometimes it's a little hard for me to be like, I don't know, I still try to give God, his glory and stuff like that because he really is there. But sometimes it's a little harder to see, where like sometimes we can kind of get trapped into the like woe was me kind of situation, or like really God, like, I thought I was doing well and like, like kind of stuff like that. And I think, yeah, like something I heard recently, like on this topic that like, I don't know, that really kind of like changed that perspective is that, someone was saying that like, oh, the reason we have a hard time, well, one of the reasons we have a hard time seeing God as a good God is because we're stuck on defining good and bad from our perspective. You know what I'm saying? Like, oh no, my leg chopped off. That's most would agree that's a bad thing. Or like, oh no, I got an accident. Most would agree that's a bad thing, right? But we categorize good and bad based on our own perception, based on like how it feels to us, right? And then we're like, if these things that we call bad happening to us, then we question like, God, why? Why? This shouldn't be happening. This is a bad thing, but you're a good God. And we're kind of falling back in the same trap of Eden, right? Of the serpent saying like, oh, good and evil for yourself. We'll be able to define it, right? So it's just like, but even with that, it's yeah, I don't know, man. I'm thinking about your situation, and I'm just like, wow, like what while you were going through that in 2020 and however long it took, did the thought ever cross your mind that like, okay, well, this must be happening for a reason, or was that kind of something you saw like in hindsight?
It was something I saw in hindsight, unfortunately, because at the time, what actually happened is that I had viewed several apartments before I knew anything was on my record. And I had prayed about specifically, like, Lord, this is what I would want in a new apartment. This is the type of location I would want, X, Y, and Z, and whatnot. And as I was doing sort of these apartment searches and visits, I came across one that was everything, met every single check item on my list, like, and more. It was beautiful. It was in a community that was like really nice. Also, it had like a fitness center that was right there. Everything that I wanted, it was just like checking off on the list. Affordable, everything. And so for me, I think the lines became blurred where it's like, this is an answered prayer, but I'm in a different situation than what the Lord intended. So how could I be in this situation, but I see the answered prayer right here? And so it wasn't making sense to me that this could be what God wants for me, because I could already see the answered prayer of what I prayed for and what I wanted. So it's like, God, it's right there. Why can't I have it? And why are you giving me this instead? And so I struggled with it for a bit. And I also never came across a situation like this before. I have a background in criminal justice, but here I am caught up in a system in which I have knowledge on, in which I give my life to, and in terms of work and all of that. And here I am caught up in some type of different system. And even though I had the education and I had the background and everything, I could see how the system was not helping me and was, in a sense, working against me. And so it was very frustrating to see how could this be God's will in the midst of this, and work through that. But as I started to give up the fight and just accept, in a sense, what was happening to me and make the best of the situation, change my perspective, is when God, at the end of it all, revealed to me, this is why I called you here. And sometimes that what happens in life. Sometimes God in the beginning will give you instructions, and he will also give you insight into what is going on. I want you to go here, and this is what I'm calling you to do, and X, Y, and Z. Like we see Abraham in the Bible, right? I'm calling you here to be a father of many nations. But then there are other situations where God is going to bring you through something and you don't even understand or could fully believe in the magnitude of what it means. And so again, with Abraham, he calls him to a place or whatnot, but you find Abraham and God having a dialogue, and God is like, I need you to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. And it's like, what? The same God that told me I would be a father of many nations is now telling me to sacrifice the only son that I have. How does that even make sense? And how could that even possibly be God's will? But we see through that situation how it then became a bigger picture, or was placed on a bigger magnitude, where we can see the relationship between God the Father and Christ the Son through Abraham and Isaac and through his obedience. And so sometimes it's difficult to see things from the beginning, but hindsight is just as powerful as well too.
Yeah, no, that's so true. Because like you can really, going back to the Joseph reference, like you can really see the parallel, if I pronounce it right. But you can see how, like, wrongly accused, of something that you didn't do, and it places you in a position that you never thought you would be in ever, and then somehow it's used to elevate you. And it's like you look at, like, this is, like you said, stuff you can kind of only really see like in hindsight, because some people may be like, how did this elevate you? You ended up in like a position that you never wanted to be in, and like an apartment that you probably wasn't thinking about at first. But it's like you're not thinking about it from the faith perspective, and how that really played a big role in probably helping with your vulnerability to God. So like, would you say like part of that, like you got out of that, was like being more vulnerable and open to God, or feeling more comfortable with like asking him questions about what's going on?
Yes, I think it widened my perspective that even in whatever situation I'm facing, whatever tribulation, God is still good. And I think it relates back to the story of the Hebrew boys, right? Where they find themselves in a fiery furnace because they were faithful to God. And so again, you have a situation where it's not adding up. The math is not mathing, right? How are they in the fiery furnace when they're faithful to God? But you look at their attitude and their posture, their heart posture is, but even if God does not deliver us, we will not bow down, right? And they could still see God's glorification in the situation. And I think for me, it was a learning lesson that even when there's an outcome of what I did not intend and what I did not pray for and what I did not hope for, and I find myself living in something that's difficult, God is still good. He can create something out of this situation that will glorify him. And so sometimes we have to learn how to be patient in the tribulation and to be continuing always in prayer, because he will reveal his glory and he can make something out of the situation.
I definitely me personally, I definitely resonate with that. And I definitely resonate with that. And I think especially, what was I thinking about just now? I remember 2 years ago, end of 2021. And it was the craziest thing, right? So I was working for a hospital, but I was like per diem for a very long time, right? It was just hard to get a full time, and I need like insurance, stuff like that. So I ended up switching to a different department of that hospital, for a full-time job. which I was there for 3 months. And I was now I was doing like outpatient versus like inpatient. It was very boring. Like it was very boring. I wasn't the biggest fan, but I was like, cool. So the pay raise, it was whatever, cool. And then things happened. Things happened like maybe like 3 months in the position. I heard that my old manager from my previous department had moved, and I was like, dang, if I only waited, right? Got to be patient. But anyways, and so one of my coworkers who was like a friend of mine got her position, and I heard up, I was like, so hey, how's it going? Like, you want to come back? I was like, yes, please. So everything happened, right? Everything happened. This is like going to almost four, no, not all, a little less than 3 months there. And long story short, for very sketchy situations, right? Not on my end, but like very sketchy situations, I got let go, right? Randomly. They're like, oh yeah, so you didn't meet performance, this and that. So we gotta let you go. This was right after I told my manager, oh hey, I was going back. Right. And so whatever. Long story short, so I got let go. So because I got let go, it shows I couldn't transfer. I couldn't complete the transfers because I was now out of that hospital system. And so I was like, wow, this kind of sucks. And I was, obviously that's because like this was the position I wanted for like very like over 2 years, right? Very, very long time. And I was like, this would be great. It'll set me up very well for like moving forward into like other things I wanted to accomplish. And boom, just like that, like all my dreams like it's like came crashing down, right? And I was like, dang, that sucks. But anyway, so like moving forward, whatever, kind of like being annoyed, moving forward, ended up going to this other job, and I kept still applying, right? I just got a job just because, pay bills and whatever. And I was still looking for like, something else, like a next step in my career. I applied for another hospital, and they, I got one interview. After the first interview, they're like, you have a lot of experience. And I was like, yeah, I know. And it was like entry level position. So they contacted someone else where I'd be doing the same exact thing I got let go from with at a different hospital. And I was kind of like, had a bad taste in my mouth and all that stuff. But long story short, that ended up being like one of the best decisions, because it was a great it was a great it was doing literally the same thing I was, supposed to have been doing before, but now it's just a different location, great staff, great support. And like it was like one of the best moves and set me up for like future things as well. And unfortunately, I think we just have as human beings, right, especially as Christians, and again, speaking from the Judeo-Christian perspective, have a habit of only really seeing God's goodness in hindsight. And I know it's a wild statement, right? Because like we're supposed to remember it in the meantime, but I think that's what real faith is, like remembering what God did in the past and staying faithful in what's kind of going on now, right? But just like the Israelites, just like maybe us in our lifetime, sometimes we just forget, right? That we just like, we're in a new situation that seems unbearable. And it's just like, hey, remember, God was like, remember that last time you felt the same exact way and I brought you through? Um, and I think it's like such an important lesson, but it's just like I don't know, it tends to be a little tough. So I guess, I mean, obviously no one can answer the question, but like I guess what would you tell to someone that who may be like struggling to see like maybe a Christian who's like struggling to see God's goodness, if that makes sense, right? Like, yeah, hopefully that question makes sense.
So one of the words that comes to mind is my favorite Bible verse. It's Hebrews 10:23, and it says, "Let us hold fast to the profession of our faith, for he is faithful who promised," right? And that promise is from God. And I think with this, it reminds us to hold on. And that's what I would say to any individual who's going through a difficult trial or situation. Hold on. This is not the end of the story. And this might be the peak. This might be the beginning, but hold on. There's a beautiful ending to this, because God is so faithful in what he has promised. And I have come to realize like Jesus is truth. Every single thing that he has written within his word is true. All of his promises are true. And it's hard to see in the midst of the difficult situation, because it's like, how, God, and why? But there's always a way where he comes through and he fulfills that promise for us. So my advice would be to continue to hold on. If you need to express it to God, I've had my days where I've lifted up complaints to God, where it's been a back and forth, where sometimes it's been one-sided, where I just complain and I don't want to listen to anything that God is telling me back. But through that, he's so faithful. And I think also just giving questions to God too, he's faithful in answering those. It might not be at the exact time that we need those answers, but he answers us back, and he continues to lift us up, hold us by his hand, and lead us through the way. And so I would tell that individual to keep holding on and not letting go, because God is not letting go of your hand. So to keep holding on.
Definitely to hear that. So I appreciate that. So thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with like church? Like like average church, like kind of growing up into it, did you grow in the church, and like what impacted like playing your life?
Yes. So I was born into the church, and I had a very skewed perception of church and in a sense like of who God is. So both of my parents, they weren't Adventists all of their lives. They sort of came to the faith, and then and then I was born into the faith, if that makes sense. And so I think as a child, as I had many questions regarding certain things, the answer was just like, well, because the church said so, or because this is how it is, and X, Y, and Z. And so I never really received answers or like biblical answers or reasoning or studying of the word to understand why certain things were the way they were, or why we do certain things. So I grew up in the church. I would say as a child, I loved it. There were a lot of activities and different things to do, a lot of children, a lot of youth and whatnot. And I enjoyed every aspect of it, engaging in those types of activities. I would say by junior high school and also my high school years is when my church started to go into development with rebuilding the church and rebuilding the structure and everything like that in a physical sense. And I think because of the renovations and everything that they were trying to make, and the difficulties and challenges they had with rebuilding our church, it led to a lot of arguments and tensions and a lot of fights between members. And so what I began to see was a lot of hypocrisy. I also started to see tensions between members in terms of, if you're supposed to love everyone and we're all God's people, why are you fighting this way or talking about this person this way? There were also sides that people would pick. There were gossip, all of the above. And so for me, what it really was is that I did not see the power of the Holy Spirit in a sense working or moving. So I began to see God as like this distant God, or this God who's just a set of rules, but then you have people who don't necessarily obey those rules. They only do things to their liking. And so I began to be really turned off and discouraged by church, because there was a standard of you have to do X, Y, and Z, or you can't do X, Y, and Z. But then in terms of treating one another and showing that love within the church, for me, it just wasn't there, or I didn't see it. And so I became kind of turned off to church. It seemed like something that I was born into, but I did not ask for. And so I had my moments where I kind of stepped away. And for me, it was just having independence. I no longer wanted to be in this structure or this setting or this bubble of what people were trying to put me in with these set of rules. And I just wanted to do what I wanted to do, because again, at the time, I wasn't seeing the power of God. So fast forward, I go away to college and I'm living my life the way that I want and doing whatever I want in that sense, not really having God. But there were specific situations where God met me. And that was the first time I began to see that, wow, spiritual warfare really exists. Up until this time frame, all the stories I've heard in the Bible and whatnot, they were stories, but I didn't necessarily see how it was applicable to my life, or I didn't necessarily see how it worked in my present day, right? It was something that was ancient. It was something that happened to them, but I didn't really understand. And so my time frame in college, I remember actually having a sense and an understanding of what the supernatural really looks like, seeing the forces of Satan, seeing the forces of God as well too. And through this is what God used to bring me back into the church, step by step and little by little. And that's how I came back. But I think I find it quite interesting that even though I had this journey or this time frame away from the church, the foundation that was laid to me as a child, although not perfect, is what really kept me and saved me from so many things until it led me back to God. And so I always say, even when I was in the world and doing worldly things, I still had a presence to me. I still had this aura to me where other people would say, where I would still be different. Okay, she will do this, but there's still something different about her. She doesn't take it to that limit and do that. Or the way that you dress, yes, you're going out here and you're going to the club and you're doing this, but you still don't dress in the sense necessarily that's all the way here. Or like the way that you talk, you do these things or whatever, and you say that, but you still don't treat other people in this way or whatever. So I still had kind of like this presence, this aura to me that I was different, even in the world, and even though I was doing worldly things. And I think that was just God's covering over me. And so, yeah, that's kind of like what it was. And coming back into the church was like learning God for myself. I never understood, in a sense, what the Sabbath really meant until I came back. And it's like, oh, okay, that's what a Sabbath is. That's what it means. That's how God intended. Oh, that's why he gave it to us. Okay, X, Y, and Z. And so it was really relearning God and just trying to understand him from a different level, a personal level that was intimate to me than this distant God who just had a set of rules.
That's cool. So here's like a two-part kind of thing. Is there like any moment in particular where you were like, all right, has went from I was born into this to this is my own, like, and also how did you cope or how did you deal with the past view of I can't ask questions or I can't question anything or go to God with like doubts? Like, how did you handle that in that transition as well?
Yes. So for the first question, how did I come to it in terms of this is my own? I think it came from the life experiences that I had. So to be transparent and honest, and I don't want to scare anyone who might be listening to this message, but I had a lot of supernatural experiences prior to coming back to God. And what I mean by this is honestly feeling or being in a room where I can sense the presence of evil spirits, or seeing myself being dragged or lifted up, or different things while I'm sleeping, feeling spirits choking me or trying to kill me in certain settings. And sometimes in some situation hearing slight voices from the enemy in terms of seeking to kill me and whatnot. And so these were certain things that I experienced one by one. And I don't know what it was specifically, but I think just what was grounded in me as a child really helped me in those situations, because at the time I wasn't really going to church or anything like that. But when I would have these interactions, I always remember, call on the name of the Lord. And I don't know why that came back to memory, but in those times I would just say, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And I would feel like the release of the evil spirit or whatever would be on me. Or there would be certain scriptures that would come back to memory. And I think about Psalms 91, right? Where it tells you, he who dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. And so this was something we always repeat as children, I remember in church, and those things will come back to memory as I would be facing those situations. And so through the experiences one by one, it made me realize God actually exists, the devil actually exists, and he's saving me. Like every situation I'm facing in this, because this is a taboo topic during the time, I didn't know anyone who was going through these experiences or anyone who I could call and tell them I'm having these experiences. I think if I would have shared it, I would have come in off schizophrenic or losing my mind, right? And even the one person that I did confide into it, they was like, oh, we don't speak about that. We don't talk about bad things out loud. And so it was kind of discouraging because I had no one during that time to express this to. But God was showing me through every battle or interaction I was having with the enemy, he was saving me from those things. And so because of that experience with God, allowed me to realize that he is real and he does exist. And that gave me the foundation that I need to start going back to church and reading the Bible and reading the word. Also during this time, one of my close best friends was also having a relationship with Christ. She was going back to church, attending regularly, and was encouraging me to come back to church. But to see the transformation that happened in her life, seeing the power of God in her life also influenced me as well to desire that and to get back to that place. So those were the first things. I can't remember your second question.
Yeah, it was how did you, I guess, cope with the view of you couldn't ask questions through that transition, and like how did you deal with, confronting those that kind of view?
Yes. So you can't ask questions. I think it allowed some anger and also animosity to develop within me towards the church overall or the church environment. And I think it allowed me to be frustrated because you coming with questions were perceived as a lack of faith or being disobedient or being defiant. And so I found myself in situations where I would be asking questions. And it's this idea, well, you don't know enough, you don't do enough Bible study on your own, and that's why you don't know the answer. Or you're trying to be defiant and go against what the standard is or what people have told you. So during those situations, my way of coping was stepping away from it, right? Finding my own path and my own way, doing my own thing. And I think coming back into the church, not necessarily that structure was no longer there, but I think it was around a time frame where people were a little bit more open to answering questions or to at least hearing what I had to say. And so God blessed me with a church community and through friends and peers who were open to going into word, like, okay, well, why did God tell Abraham to go and put Isaac up there? Like, what was going on with that, right? Or to ask questions, well, why do we do these things? Or why can't we do these things? And where did this come from? And I think surrounding me with a community that was open to questions really helped me on my walk. And asking questions to God himself, right? Building that relationship with him through experience, I then trusted him enough to start asking those questions to him as well.
I think that's really cool that like you speaking of those communities, right? Those communities who you were able to be more open with and and make those relationships with. Like truthfully, I think no matter what denomination you are, or what your personal like views are, like I think, I truly believe that the real church has always been the people around you, like your community, where two or three are gathered. Literally that's all it takes. And I think it's beautiful when those communities are able to kind of help God works through them to help guide you back to him, right? And then so you can now do the same thing for the church that all kind of pushed you out. So the same whether it's your home church, you find a different church where it's like, okay, now I have a better understanding or a new understanding of the Sabbath and church and all this stuff. And now I can go out and minister to people who may have had the same questions that I did. And I think that's really dope. Really quick, but with the previous question though, I think it's so interesting, right? Because I think it's ever since like you hear it a lot in like Haitian Adventist churches and like in Haiti and also like here where in terms of like the spiritual warfare aspect of kind of things, right? It it is something that people don't really talk about. It's almost like and like I like talking about it, not because I want insurance, I definitely don't, just that God and but but I think it's so important because like how real it is, and then like how real it is and yeah, I kind of wish like more people like told their stories because it's just like it is a different and like I don't think I mean I sit I call it a gift because that's what I believe that it is, you know. So like, and I don't think it's a gift that a lot of people, like, not too many people have, you know, that gift to truly be able to tap into like the spiritual realm. And obviously, you know, like, you know, just not, we're not trying to hide anything about like the Christian faith, right? So like that's why like this podcast is just about being super open. And have you ever heard of the book He Came to Set the Captives Free
I've heard,
by
but I haven't read it.
it's honestly the book that catapulted me into like my personal walk with God, right? Like I got baptized like young, right? Like, oh yeah, I don't want to go to hell. Yeah, I want to be baptized. But like I remember like in eighth grade, I think, end of eighth grade, beginning of like high school, I was reading this book and like my whole family was kind of reading it. I forgot who introduced it to us, but it was called He Came to Set the Captives Free. And long story short, it's two co-authors, Elaine and Doc. I forgot the doctor's name. Well, I guess X. I don't know where she is now. But long story short, one talks about one was a doctor in psychology. I forgot what they're called. A doctor in psychology. She was seeing and treating patients for like all these different things. And, you know, a lot of them coming in with like certain diagnosed like schizophrenia or dementia, bipolar disorder, right? Where um, and like through prayer, she was able to kind of realize that these people are actually fighting spiritual warfare, right? That and they're coming in because someone said, "Oh, it's like, oh yeah, you know, you're having these delusions, visions, whatever," and realizing. And so she did like a whole thing. Like she spent her life kind of studying like what is like any like commonalities between her patients and like all this and that. And long story short, she started, kind of like instead of like prescribing um and shadow and private practice, but instead of like prescribing like a lot of medication, stuff like that, a lot of times she would like, pray with them, tell them, okay, hey, yeah, do this, but along with that, like I would encourage like find a church, stuff like that. And like they would start praying and she'd pray with them and finally realize that like a lot of them started getting better in certain ways, right? And anyways, long story short, she got fired because, mixing religion and medicine. After getting fired, one of her patients was this lady, I believe her name was Elaine, and she was in the complete opposite end from a young age. She, certain things happened with her family where now she had these supernatural powers and was tapping into like the spiritual and getting really heavy into I forget exactly what I don't want to speak ignorantly or ignorantly, but like she didn't use the word witchcraft, but she did call herself a witch at some point, right? And so her perspective, so they both worked together. They fasted and prayed, like, were overrun by like spiritual battles. And then they started talking about, their experiences, like, how they kind of got over, what they did together, the things that the enemy kind of uses to be able to, access people and stuff like that. And that book kind of got me really interested because I'm like, wow, like, that was the first time I kind of realized that, like, oh, this stuff was real, and it got me more interested, like, in the Bible, And so, I was just kind of saying that to say that like I kind of wish we did talk a little bit more, but then I'm gonna have to, definitely pick your brain about some of like the things that you've seen, which is I think is really cool. So obviously, if you don't mind in the future.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing up that point and mentioning that. There was one thing you said is that it's a gift, right? And I think that's another reason why I didn't find myself, my placement in the church, mainly because I didn't know what my spiritual gifts were. And I think within the church, majority of the time, most of your spiritual gifts or the gifts that are prioritized, it's like music ministry. So can you sing? Can you play as a child, right? There's also, okay, can this child preach? Maybe they can start thinking about pastorship and whatnot. And I was not in any of those lines. And so I didn't know what my spiritual gifts were. And so it's again feeling this disconnect or this distance from the environment because I didn't know what I was experiencing or what I could see was a spiritual gift at all. So I think there needs to be more discussions because now as a young adult, I think I've just been connecting with other people and we've been realizing, wow, from childhood, we had this thing and we've had it for a while, and we start putting two and two together, and like, you see this too, you go through this too, and it's like, wow, it's a whole community of us. But we didn't have that when we were younger. We just thought, okay, I'm going crazy, or let me just ignore it and run away because I don't want to deal with it. I'm not knowing that was a gift that God has given us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so true. Because, I don't think we like realize this, but we really put a lot of people at a disservice, as well as like, displacing them when we only focus on some spiritual gifts and not others. Because, I'm pretty sure you're not the only one who's feeling like, wow, I have no place here, or there's nothing I can do, or they might question whether something was a spiritual gift because they only seen the church focus on musical and, speaking related spiritual gifts, or know how somebody's ability to teach the Bible. They would only focus on those rather than the stuff that they might have some trouble understanding, such as like, I know sometimes it like comes to dreams, or being perceptive of like spiritual warfare. All things, the church should definitely place some more of an emphasis on, and not from the emphasis of being like, this is what it is, but more on the emphasis of like, this is real, this exists, and we should be exploring this more together.
Yeah, even like something I'm realizing more so. I don't know why, like now, but like even like the gift of like empathy, like it's like the real empaths. Like I know some people who like they see a homeless person and it truly like tears their soul, right? Like they're like, I need to do something about this, right? Like, and I'm realizing even like stuff like that is a gift, but then like we cast those people out like, wow, you're too emotional because like grew up in New York, it's like we all become desensitized to it. But yeah, like I think you're right now. Like, yeah, definitely like more conversations to be had. Can you, I mean, I don't, I'm sorry if you forgot, if you touched on this already, but um can you tell us a little bit more about like, do you remember like the moment you because you talk about you come back to God moment, right? Not just come back to church, right? Because like but like come back to like from taking your time, living your life, and all that stuff. But like, do you remember what exactly kind of called you back? I mean, I know you said you went through a lot of kind of like spiritual things in that time, but like I guess I don't know if you're able to contest like you remember like the exact time, not like time in seconds, but like the moment, I guess. You're like, yeah, I know this. I need something more than this life I'm living.
Yes. And sometimes I'm hesitant to share like certain things, just given everyone's spiritual standpoint and also at their level as well. But this is my testimony and kind of what I experienced. So during that time when I was in college, I was interested in joining a Greek organization, a sorority. And during that summer, as I was taking my steps in joining that organization, is when the spiritual attacks began to heighten and began to come with intensity. And so during that summer, as I was facing most of these spiritual attacks and going through all of these things, my best friend invited me to a crusade that was occurring. So my goal for that summer is just like, okay, let me get everything prepared so that when I go back in the fall, I know I'm straight and ready to do what I have to do with the sorority and whatnot in the pledging process. So during that summer, I had no intentions of going back to church or anything like that, but my best friend kept inviting me and encouraging me to go to this particular crusade that was happening. And so I remember going to the crusade, and I can't remember exactly what the sermon was about, but I do remember speaking to myself and saying, something is not right with me spiritually. There are a lot of things going on. And the message was kind of about the doors closing on you, or in a sense, like, having those final moments where the Holy Spirit is trying to connect with you, but you're closing the door on the Holy Spirit. And what if this is your last chance? And so I remember in that moment, hearing that sermon, I was just like, I don't want to continue in this spiritual drought that I'm having right now. Because at the time, just removed from God, and I'm not as prayerful. I'm not reading the word as I used to and whatnot. And I no longer wanted that spiritual doubt. So I would think that was the moment, sitting in church and listening to that sermon and it touching me. What if these are the last few moments of my life or whatnot? Do I want to close the door to the Holy Spirit? And so that sort of led me on a journey of at least coming back to Christ. So it did take me a few years, in a sense, to really relearn God and relearn certain things in the Bible. And eventually, a few years from there, I got rebaptized. But it did take a journey. That journey started with just sitting in church, hearing that sermon during that crusade, and understanding kind of the spiritual condition I was in with having a spiritual drought inside of me.
Wow, thank you for that. Thank you for, your openness, honestly. And I think it's, although sometimes like it may feel like, oh, like I don't know how people are gonna respond to this. Like there's always someone else kind of going through something similar, right? So you have no clue how, whoever wants to hear your testimony. So thank you for your openness, truthful. And that's genuinely wild. I'm not gonna lie to you. That's pretty cool.
No, I was just kind of adding to that because I definitely do believe there's a lot of people who go through their own similar experiences alone, and because it's not talked about as often, or people don't really share the like experiences that they can relate to as often. They may definitely come from the standpoint of like, dang, I'm probably going crazy. Like, no, you're not going crazy. Like, this stuff is real. This is happening out there. So, and
Yeah.
definitely we need more sharing of it.
Yes. And to add on to that, especially as I was going back to church, there were other experiences that were happening at the same time. So again, God using experiences to talk to me. So as I mentioned, I was trying to join that sorority organization. And as I'm going back to church, God, in a sense, whispered in my ear one day to look up something. And it might sound weird to a lot of people, but it just came out of nowhere to look this up. Now, during this time frame, I'm not trying to age myself, YouTube was not as popular as it was today. YouTube would just be like, it was kind of like this distance website where, people uploaded videos on there, but it wasn't something that you go to and you watch content all the time. But I wanted to do some more studying and preparation for the organization that I was trying to join and whatnot. And randomly, the Spirit of the Lord just spoke to me, just type this in the search bar on YouTube. And I'm like, that's weird. Like, not even Google, just type that in. So I typed it in and a video comes up, and it's a girl and she's trying to join the same organization. Well, she joined the same organization that I was interested in. And she kind of gave her life story and kind of broke it down piece by piece of why she wanted to join and how she joined and whatnot. And it was the exact replica of my story to the T. Like, she had a teacher in high school who took an interest in her, and that teacher in high school was part of the organization, and why she wanted to join, her values, everything, like parallel exactly to my own interest and my own desire of joining. But then she went into why God called her out of it and why she denounced being part of that organization. And she sort of opened my eyes to a couple of things that I knew, but didn't know how to put into words or communicate. And so I began to see that some of the spiritual attacks that I was receiving was sort of in relation to that. And there was something going on behind the scenes. And so it's weird because there were several times where I tried to join this organization, and for random reasons, the door would close, right? So it gets canceled because of some reason, close, right? Or it gets canceled again because someone told and they talked about the hazing or whatever, that gets closed and whatnot. But the moment that I said, and I found out deeply that God did not want me to do it for my own personal walk and my personal experience with God, when I decided no longer to do it anymore, literally, it went through. Like, that line for that specific year went through. There was no block, there was no stop. I just was no longer on it. And for me, that just symbolized that God was really cutting it year by year, time by time, to make sure that I would not join it. And the moment that I decided that I'm not going to join or be a part of it anymore, he closed that door specifically. There were other situations that I was facing at the time, or that I was in. And in particular, I was talking to this boy that I should not have probably been talking to or whatever. And God probably knew that would have distracted my journey and my walk with God. And randomly, out of nowhere, one of my friends, her mother called me, and her mother is very spiritual, very in the faith. And she's a strong Christian. And she called me out of nowhere. And she said, God told me to tell you this. Are you by yourself? And I'm at work in college. I'm like, what? And she comes to me and she gives me a whole rundown of who this individual is. And she gives me insight on his character. And I'm like, how do you know these things, right? And it's because God had spoken to her to give a message to me, like, don't engage in this. And as soon as she told me this, immediately, same day, same hour, same minutes, cut it off, right? And I was no longer in it. And just having those experiences early on, it was like, wow, God is really trying to save me. God is really doing something. Like, he is giving me messages through people, through YouTube, through whatever. Like, he's really trying to do a work in me. So it was not just gaining the knowledge of God, going back to church, but also having the experiences as well too.
Yeah, that is crazy. Because I also have another friend who has similar experiences. And, I guess sometimes they can struggle with knowing, okay, is this from God or is this from something else? How have you learned how to steward that gift to know this is definitely God, and then other times be like, nah, this is not it.
I like that.
Man, through trials. And it's something that I am still learning. So as I mentioned, growing up, I didn't really know what my spiritual gifts were. So in young adulthood is when I started to learn, okay, this could possibly be a gift and whatnot. But it got to a point where the devil saw and realized I'm having an understanding of my spiritual gifts. And so to put things into perspective, my spiritual gifts, one of them is faith, and also discernment or prophecy. And so since the devil knew that I had this strong level of faith, what began to happen through these trials and situations when I would find myself, for example, in a circumstance where it's something on my record that I did not do, or I find myself in another situation where I prayed, God gave me clarity, he told me to walk through the door, and then the door hits me in my face. Like, how does that make sense? And so through this, I began to go through this cycle of, well, maybe I'm not hearing God the way that it's supposed to, because I'm equating justice, again, that good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people, right? And I'm equating that, okay, if God tells me this and it's his will, it's going to happen in the way that I believe. And if it doesn't happen, then maybe it wasn't God's will. If he tells me to walk to the door and the door shuts itself on me or hits me in the face as it's closing on me, then that wasn't God who spoke to me. And so I started to get confused within my mind. And is it God who's speaking, or is he not speaking? And to be very transparent and honest, there was a season in particular where something happened. And I knew it was God who spoke to me and told me to walk in it, to engage with it, to do it or whatnot. But then it ended up in a really bad or a sour ending, let's say, in the situation. And I remember going through this depressive state because I could not understand how God could tell me to do something and it ended up in the condition that it did. And so the devil began to use that, and he began to say, well, it wasn't God. You made it all by yourself. Your heart was talking to you. It was not God. And so I'm getting, in a sense, really sad and discouraged because I'm believing, like, I heard God and it didn't happen. So maybe what the devil is saying is true. Maybe it was my own thoughts. Maybe I don't know how to discern and hear God the way that I did. And I just felt so discouraged. And it's amazing because God brought me to the story of Elijah, where Elijah is able to do this powerful and this prophetic revelation of who God is in front of the Israelites. All right. I'm remembering the story, help me out here, where, he has these two fires, or he creates these two areas for fire to come down, and God reveals his glory through him in that situation. But then fast forward, you see that the king is seeking to destroy him, to kill him actually, and he finds himself down, discouraged, and depressed. And you ask yourself why, right? And I think with Elijah, it was not just that he's running and fighting from his life, but I think he was discouraged. God, how am I here in the middle of nowhere, in this desert, just down, running for my life, if you are who you say that you are? And I think that really brought him to the discouraged state. And for my own self, putting myself or putting the story to my perspective, I'm thinking Elijah during that time was like, did I really hear what God was saying? Is he really going to save Israel? Is he really going to come through and deliver? Was that my voice or was that the voice of God? Am I really a prophet? Like, what's going on? And I could just imagine in that state really bringing it down to like being depressed and discouraged. But what did God do? God gave him that light and that encouragement to know it is me who is speaking to you, and give him more experiences to see his glory and to see his power revealed through Elijah. And so for me, it is a constant battle sometimes of, is this God's voice or not? But he's showing me the more that I feast on his word, the more that I get up and I eat after being discouraged, the more that I run back to him for questions, I begin to believe in him. I begin to train my mind to his voice. I begin to train my mind to his understanding and receive the gift of knowing what is his voice, what is my voice, and what is the enemy's voice. And his voice will always be that of solid character, of love, of encouragement, of peace, of happiness, of joy. All of those things will be centered on his voice.
Beautifully said. Like, thank you. Yeah. Well, that's beautifully said. And so like through in those situations, you're just like, yes, that's who God is, because this voice is different than anything else, even though you may not be able to describe exactly what's different, but like you just know because you know your master's voice, you know. And I think like no matter what gift you have, it always connects you to God. You know, whatever it is, you know, that's the whole purpose of it. Not to go out and make money or do miracles or run mega churches. You know, it's just a way that you communicate to God, in which God communicates to you, that you can always hear. And then because it's God working through you, like it's going to produce natural fruit, natural outpourings of whoever it's supposed to help, whether that's praying for someone else, or, you know, calling someone else and like, hey, you know, I just kind of, I don't know, I had this weird dream, looks sketchy, just letting you know, I'm being a good friend, do what you want with that information, you know. And so I think that's really dope. And like, I guess the question that it kind of brings it to my head is so with all that, with like your experiences and the church, out of church, and like, you know, your relationship with God throughout the years, who would you say God is to you now? Like, who is God to you?
God is love. That's the only way that I can put it into summary. God is love. When it says God is omnipotent, when God is omnipresent, and when you think that God is provider, Prince of Peace, all of these words to describe him, they all come back to everlasting love. Like, God is literally the definition of everlasting love. From every experience that I've been through in life, whatever he has brought me through, whatever I've experienced, has always been centered on his everlasting love. Like, that is his character, that is who he is to me. And without understanding God's love, I would not be where I am today. And I still don't understand it to this full capacity. He still amazes me day by day. But I would say, if I could summarize who God is to me, it's everlasting love by far and by definition.
Well, I guess kind of wrap us up. Speak to, like, you know, the people who probably been in like similar situations as you, who are trying to, you know, build their definition of what justice is, you know, trying to find out their place with their like spiritual gifts, and also trying to find their reason why. Like, speak to them and kind of like encourage them, or, you know, help them to see like things they can do to continue in this path.
I just want to encourage whoever exists or is listening to this podcast, that God has created you for a divine intervention within this world. There is a work that you can do that no one else in this entire world will be able to do, that your gifts, your talents, and your strength is going to be used for his kingdom. And so continue to hold God, because who he calls, he also equips as well. And so continue to hold on to him, because even though you might walk through life where there's difficulties and there's challenges, do not have any fear. Although you might be discouraged, although you might find yourself with sadness, with grief, with gloom, and frustration and anger at some points, do not lose hope in God, because he is holding you by his righteous right hand. He is paving the ways for you. When you are suffering, when you are drowning from the floods of life, God is there to pull you out of the water. He is there to walk you across that sea. He is there to bring you to the land. And when you are in the land and it's scorching hot and you are parched, he is there to bring the food and the water that you need. Whatever it is, God is present and he is near to you. He is there to you. And he is walking you through this pathway of life because of the high calling that he has given you. So my encouragement to you is to walk in your priesthood, to walk in the gifts of knowing that God's salvation reigns over you, to walk in the gift of his everlasting love, and to walk in the knowledge that to the full capacity of what life could ever be, God is there with you and giving you all the tools that you need. So be encouraged.